This is Jeff.
This is Lex.
And this is the Missions Podcast. All right, so you must be wondering why you're here.
That's right. No, thank you, Jeff, for the opportunity. I guess it's a roller coaster of emotions. You know, first time listening to podcasts, kind of like not sure what it is, what I got myself into. So you're right.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't realize that you really didn't know what podcasts even were. So I was just like, hey, Alex, would you like to do this podcast with me? And she's like, what the hell's a podcast? So I introduced you to a couple.
Yes, you did. I fell in love with the first one, the Corolla one.
Yeah, Corolla.
I was
well, you were into Drew already. What, I guess, did you still watch Loveline or something?
Yeah, that's what it was. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, yeah, it's a great place to start if people haven't been into podcasting, and we'll always have love for Corolla because he went to court and he had to fight these patent trolls that were going after him and other podcasters like Mark Maron and the big money makers, because they thought they had a patent that they could apply from way back when it was never even used or anything.
Really?
But Corolla himself dunked out a lot of money for to protect podcasters' rights to own their product. So that's pretty good. Now that you've listened to a few podcasts and you got kind of an idea what it's all about.
Very, very interesting. I mean, you know what it is? It's like you have so much free time and you don't know who's going to be sharing the same experience that you have.
Right.
The ideas that you have in your head, it's like, and then you listen to in your own time. You can always stop.
Yep.
And it's like, go back again and listen, what was the point of doing that? It's like you have that chance to do that. So I like that.
For sure. And I've discovered so much interesting things that I just never would have known about if it weren't for some of these podcasts. And it's amazing because, TV and stuff, they can only cover so many subjects. And I've really learned stuff you missed in history class and some of these other Joe Rogan. My goodness, some of the people that guy sits down with, it's just amazing, mind-blowing conversations. And I think that's what I fell in love with was it's kind of like one of the last places where people have real conversations. And it's not like pretty much everything on the TV is scripted to some sense.
Exactly. You're not reading a book here. You're not reading something that somebody's telling you to say, and you've got to be careful because somebody might get you in trouble because you're not saying the right thing.
Right.
So that I like. So what about you? I mean, why are you interested in podcasts?
Well, initially?
Yes.
Well, initially, I got interested in podcasts a long time ago. I was out on injury from work. I had a really bad back injury. I could hardly walk, so even going to the bathroom was really bad. So I started to tinker with my music in GarageBand, and I noticed a button up top that said podcast, and I had no idea what a podcast was, but I was interested because it was in GarageBand, so I figured it could be music related in some sense. And that was basically my main gearing in the first place, was to figure out how to use it for music purposes. But as soon as I found out what a podcast was, I had just got my Mac. That was my very first computer, was an iMac, and I had just gotten a iPhone 3G. So I was interested in how they could work together, and on a podcast by Rob Walch of Libsyn that we're going to talk to later, he introduced me, or actually one of his listeners introduced me to an app called iTeleport, which allowed me to control my Mac, which was in a completely different room from the bed where I was pretty much staying all day because I couldn't walk.
So that's how you knew these things. I was wondering. I was like, how did this guy know so much about computers, this Macintosh, and all of that?
That was my introduction, and just realizing how much more information I could absorb. For some reason, when I was in school, I never gave a shit about learning, but now that I'm older, it's like I want to just absorb as much information as I can. I just love to learn stuff.
Kind of had a late reaction.
Yeah, exactly. It's like when you wanted to teach me, I wasn't there, but now I can't stop learning
Can I
things.
go back? Right, that's cool. So what are you from? Are you from San Antonio? No, you're not from San Antonio.
No, I was born in Florida. I was born in Tampa, Florida on a Coast Guard base. And my dad went from, he was a Marine initially, then he went went in the Coast Guard, and then he went into avionics, like aircraft maintenance. He was a aircraft mechanic, and he bounced around from job to job. So things were a little rough in the first place. We lived in Liberty City for the first couple of years of my life. We were there for the riots in 1980. And then the white family in Liberty City during the race riots of 1980. And then we moved from there to, like more inner city Miami. And I grew up there. We did a lot of crabbing and, catching crabs on the side of the shore and stuff, snorkeling. Yeah, it was really nice. I miss living there. But after Eastern Airlines shut down, my dad was jobless again. He found that we lived in Wisconsin for a torturous year. I don't even want to talk about that. And then we moved to Texas, and it just felt like the most place that felt like home.
How old were you when you moved to Texas?
When I moved to Texas, I was 14?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so like middle school.
Right.
Yeah, matter of fact, that's where I started 9th grade in San Antonio. I went to Garner Middle School. And in Florida, we didn't really have like street gangs, like Bloods and Crips and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I came to school with a DJ Quick shirt on. And these guys want to like fight me. They're like, isn't he a Blood? And I just look at my friend. I'm like, what's a Blood? He's like, a gangster. I'm like, oh, well, yeah. So then everybody just assumes that I'm like down with the Bloods, like an all Crip school. Like San Antonio was kind of crazy before you got here.
Really?
So yeah, you kind of lucked out in that sense.
well, actually, for me, it was kind of like not the same, but as you know, I was born and raised in Ecuador, South America.
Hold on, Ecuador?
Yes. No, it's not Mexico. Okay.
Oh.
Okay.
I'm
South
Texan.
America. No, that's Ecuador. So when I moved to America, it was the same. I was about 14, 15 years old.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then I moved to the Bronx, to the boogie down Bronx. Imagine.
So, hold up. Did you know English before you
No. I learned French, Italian.
Wow.
But English. So when I moved here...
hold up. You telling me you speak 3 languages?
No, I learned. It doesn't mean that I speak.
Okay.
Back
not necessarily
I was 11,
fluent.
12 years old. You have to take a language class.
That's true. You got to keep up with it.
Exactly. So, but that's cool, Jeff. So, and then what happened?
No. Keep going.
No. And then what happened? So you were 14. That was Christian? Your friend? No. By that time, you didn't meet Christians, right?
I met Christian in 9th grade.
About Christian life. People do not know.
That's all right. He's going to be on the show.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for sure. And he's also a sociology
yes.
master's.
I remember that, yeah.
So, yeah, now we're going to have some pretty interesting conversations with Christian.
I changed my major, by the way, from computer science to sociology. Hopefully. I lost so many credits, by the way. Still paying my loans.
Yeah, computers might have paid off a little better.
Exactly. Look, you learn everything based on podcasts, and I spent like 2.5 years learning how to run a PC.
Well, I wouldn't say I learned everything from podcasts, but I definitely did learn everything about computers from podcasts. And like you say, I tend to know a little bit more than you.
You're right.
Has that paid off for you? I mean, what are you using sociology at your other jobs?
Well, actually, now I work for health insurance. So yes, I mean it's interesting because I don't regret about going to school because I did enjoy it.
Yeah.
I highly recommend kids to finish their degrees. I mean, at the end, it's what you want to do in life and what makes you happy. So for me, everything so far has been, good.
Yeah.
I mean, you have dreams, of course. I wanted to be an actress. I wanted to be everything. But at the same time, I have my family. I guess it's just balance.
Yeah.
Never, ever stop what you like to do. So that's why I'm still doing what I like to do. That's why I'm here. Hey.
And that's the idea, really. That's exactly what I was looking for, is that, I always wanted to be more than what I am. I always want to do this and dabble in that. And, I'll always be a musician, no matter if I make $1 from it or not. And I've always wanted to entertain. And I think that podcast is a way to both inform and entertain. And you don't got to stuff yourself into a little box. So I think this is going to be fun.
Yeah, I think so. I'm very excited. So let's do it.
All right, let's do it. And just like that, here we are, the very first guest of the Missions podcast, Rob Walch of Libsyn podcast hosting and the Today in iOS podcast. Here we go.
I get hot, thirsty, ready to escape. Me too. This is a job for Kool-Aid. Hey, Kool-Aid! Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I started podcasting 11 years ago. So this time 11 years ago, I was starting to work on my first podcast.
Yeah.
And got my first one up late in 2004. There wasn't a lot of people. And my first podcast was about interviewing podcasters. And I think the hard part early on was figuring out how to record the interview, record a Skype interview.
Yeah.
Because Skype interviews are always going to sound better, just because phone is limited. Phone system is limited on how the audio quality will sound.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So trying to figure out how to record that Skype interview took me 30 episodes before I really got a recording system that I liked, that was reliable and easy to set up, and didn't require the end user, the person that but the interviewee to do anything.
Yeah.
And then after that, it was pretty easy. But those were fun days early on. I mean, back in late 2004, there wasn't a lot of people podcasting, and if those were they were diehards because there was no iTunes. There was no iTunes support.
Wow.
So when you got into, there was iTunes, there wasn't support for podcasts. So if you got into podcasting in 2004 and early 2005, it wasn't because you were chasing some glory. You were doing it because you just wanted to get your voice out there. You wanted to have fun. It was a hobby.
And I think that's still most podcasters' main focus. I mean, it's that you feel like you've got something to contribute and you want to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the main thing. And it should be, I think, the driving force.
It should be, right. It should be the main thing, yeah. Oh, yeah, there's no doubt about it. There are a lot of podcasters that get into podcasting still today that are doing it just as a hobby, just to have fun. Just to get some people I talk with, they're a bunch of guys that they're friends from college, and now they're married, and they use the podcast as an excuse to get together on a Friday night or a Sunday night and just talk about sports or video games or Game of Thrones or whatever it is that they're talking about.
Right.
And that's a great reason to do a podcast.
I was doing it early. I was doing it pretty much as soon as I started listening to you. So that's when the 3G came out. But when I was doing it then, I was basically doing like music mixes. Like I would just mix music together, and the problem there was I was using, other people's music without permission, so I couldn't keep doing that.
Yeah, that's not good.
No, that's not good.
No such thing as fair use when it comes to music.
Right, exactly. It was fun. It was great, and I did, I acquired some listeners, and it was just something I really enjoyed doing. So I know Libsyn can help me.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, if you want to get a podcast and get an app for your podcast, Libsyn's the way to go. That's who does my app. I work for Libsyn, obviously, but we have over 1,000 podcasters who we've created apps for their podcasts, and it makes it easy to get you an iOS app, an Android app, a Windows Phone 8 app. What you want to do is do your recording however you're most comfortable. You can use GarageBand to do the recording. I wouldn't recommend it for doing the recording of an interview.
Gotcha,
GarageBand tends to crash, and you lose the interview.
Yeah, no, I've got a hard recorder that I bring. It's like a multi-track recorder, but it's easily portable, and I can set up a couple mics.
Right, and then you take that recording and bring it over into GarageBand and edit GarageBand. I've been using GarageBand for 11 years.
Yeah,
I like GarageBand. I've used a lot of other software. I've used Soundtrack Pro, and
I find it does everything I need for free, and editing waveforms is the most important part, and that's easily done. So.
Right. But if you're not on a Mac and you don't have the option of GarageBand, on the PC, Adobe Audition would be the best one to start with.
Okay.
Adobe Audition. I have yet to hear anybody that uses Adobe Audition that doesn't like it. everyone seems to, or has used it, doesn't like it. Everyone seems to really like Adobe Audition. So that one probably has the best rating. But GarageBand, I really like. And if you're on the Mac, it's free, and there's a lot of tutorials out there and teach you how to use it. So you create your recording. Let's stick with GarageBand in this case. You create your recording in GarageBand, and then you export, or in the terminology of GarageBand, you share to iTunes.
Right.
And in that term, share to iTunes, it's iTunes on your computer, not iTunes Store. So you're sharing to iTunes on your computer, and you want to share it as an uncompressed file. You don't want to share it as MP3. You want to choose the uncompressed option, and that gets it over as an AIFF file. Then in GarageBand, in iTunes, then you can then encode it to MP3 format per the settings that you want. And the best setting that I find is that is 64 kilobits per second bit rate, 44.1 kilohertz sample rate, and mono. And that works out to half a meg a minute. If you're really anal about your music or about your audio quality, you can go to 96 kilobits per second. Now, when you're setting up that encoding settings in iTunes on your computer, what you need to do is go to Preferences, and you go up to iTunes and then select Preferences. And then under Preferences, under General, there's Import Settings, and then you change your import settings to import using MP3 encoder, and then select, I think it's usually defaults to quality, but you want to change it to custom. And then from custom, you check the stereo bitrate, double what you want your mono bitrate to be. So select the stereo bitrate at either 128 kilobits per second or 192 kilobits per second. And then go sample rate 44.1 and then channels mono. What you set as the stereo bitrate, the file will come out half of that. So if you set it at 192, it'll be 96. If you set it at 128, it'll be 64. And then click OK. And that'll keep your settings there. And then once you've had that file that's been imported in, you just go to the AIF file, and then you select encode to MP3 or convert to MP3. I think is the correct terminology. And it converts it to MP3, and boom, now the file is ready for you to upload. I would recommend you add some ID3 tag information to it. That's getting a little bit more technical. But once that file is ready to upload, what you do is drag it out of iTunes. You just literally drag it out of iTunes, your music library in iTunes, onto the desktop of your computer, and change the file name so that it makes sense. And then get it ready, and then go to wherever you're hosting. And in the case of my case, it's Libsyn for over 10 years.
Right.
Go to Libsyn and then upload the file from Libsyn.
This is where it was
Libsyn.
different, because I used to use iWeb. That's what I used to transfer it to from GarageBand, and I miss iWeb because that was super easy. But
Libsyn is really, Libsyn's really easy. You log into your Libsyn account, and you select create. You go to content and create new episode, and then you select the file that you want to upload that you just created, and add a title, a description, and you hit publish. And that's all you have to do. It can be that simple.
And is there a website provided for that?
Yeah, and I do. The Today in iOS website is completely on Libsyn. My other podcast, KC Startup 411, is on Libsyn. So I manage a couple of my websites on Libsyn, and you get an RSS feed from Libsyn, which is 100% iTunes compliant, which is the key part of being a podcast. 80% of your downloads come from your RSS feed. So after you've got that, you've got it up, you've published it, you've got this RSS feed with your first episode on it, then you can go ahead and take that episode, take that RSS feed and submit it to iTunes. Now, there's some other pieces in there. You had to set your Libsyn account up. You have to add your artwork. It has to be iTunes compliant. And I want to let people know, if you go to iTunes and you search for Podcast 101, I've got an iBook that will take you step by step through all of this. So if you go to if you just search for Podcast 101, you'll find an iBook that'll take you step by step through any of these details that I'm going over that aren't in perfectly clear.
Okay, I'm writing that down right now because I'm going to buy that.
If you don't even have to buy it, it's free.
Really? Oh man, thanks, Rob.
Yeah,
You did it again.
and you'll learn more in that iBook than you would in any webinar you're paying money for. And the people out there try to sell a lot of the stuff that you can find some of the best advice for free out there when it comes to podcasting.
What, your son was doing a podcast for a little while. Is he still doing it?
He's still doing it. Porter's podcast. Absolutely.
Yeah, Porter's podcast. Put that out there. And what is he talking about? Games and stuff like that. I mean, my son is
he answers
Minecraft.
questions. Yeah, people call in and ask him questions.
Today an iPhone was just it's definitely over time. There's so much that I've taken from that and used and still use to this day that otherwise that I just wouldn't have known. And you know, it's neat to have a powerful tool in your hand, but then how many people are walking around with them and they don't know half of what you can really accomplish with them. So it's really neat to have that. The way that you've developed now, like this community of people that help each other. You know.
I mean, I've gotten really lucky with that podcast from the perspective that I've got such great audience interaction.
Yeah.
And the audience helps, and they answer questions, they ask questions.
Yeah, it's great.
I mean, my knowledge is minuscule compared to the combined knowledge of my audience. And I've been lucky enough to tap that knowledge for the show.
Well, it's smart. You can't know it all.
Helps it.
You know,
Right.
You just can't know it all.
No, I've heard a few podcasts where they think they do. So.
Well, yeah, that's true too. What made you first want to start doing that? Like,
Start podcast? Well, the very first podcast, I was just looking for a hobby. It was, again, it was late 2004. I heard this thing, podcasting was starting.
yeah,
I just finished my MBA at UConn earlier in the spring. I was traveling for work, and I was just looking for something as a hobby, something to do to pick up my now. I had free time after finishing my MBA. I didn't have kids at the time, so I was kind of like radio. I was one of those annoying people that would call into the radio station all the time, and they even give me a backdoor number. So I can do my own show. I don't have to be calling into radio. So I can do my own show, and I just had the idea that I would do a show where I'd interview other podcasters, and that's how the podcast started. And when I made that decision at that time, at that point there was only about 100 people podcasting.
yeah.
As I could tell, if that.
And you started podcasting about the iPhone before it even existed.
Yeah, I started the iPhone one in April of 2007. So my first podcast was Podcast Wall of One, which was late 2004.
Yeah.
And then in April 2007, I started Today an iPhone as the first podcast about the iPhone. So I made sure I launched as the very first podcast covering the iPhone.
Yeah, and I shouldn't say before it existed, but before it came out.
Before it came out, yeah. I mean, it was after Steve Jobs announced it, but before it was available to touch and feel.
Yeah, and I actually went back even and listened to those early episodes, and it was really interesting just hearing, people discussing what this thing might do.
Well, it's funny, if you go back and listen to some of those early ones, you hear them talk about haptic feedback. And it took how many years to get haptic feedback? All these years, finally have haptic feedback.
And
they finally have a haptic engine inside the iPhone. But it's just funny, though, if you hear us speculating back in the early days. Well, a couple episodes, I talked about haptic feedback and explained what it was. And it's, here, that was early 2007. Now, 8 years later, we finally get an iPhone that actually has some haptic feedback capability.
Yeah, that is something. Is there anything about like podcasters that really bug you? Like
because the biggest mistake I think some podcasters make is not editing when they should.
Right.
I've heard an example of one person sent me a clip of, he sent me a link to his episode so I could interview him on my show. And about 10 minutes into the episode, there's a knock at the door.
Yeah.
And he goes, "Hold on, I'll be right back." And he walks away and leaves the thing running.
And that's what he posted?
And you can hear, and you can hear him talking in the background.
Oh gosh.
And then eventually he comes back and he goes, "Okay, I'm back." And
wow.
And that's what you call an edit point. You have to cut that crap out. And,
of course.
So I think one of the biggest mistakes some people make is thinking that they don't need to edit because someone told them, "Oh, you don't need to edit. It's podcasting," and that's wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes you don't have to edit a lot, but you do need to edit some.
No, you've got to really be good at, I guess, talking to carry on a full conversation with somebody and not edit anything out.
Editing is your friend. It's
Yeah,
not
for
live,
sure.
so there's no reason not to.
Absolutely not. Definitely not.
My other podcast that I started a year ago in December was KC Startup 411, where I just interview local Kansas City startups and just talk to them and find out what's going on in the local Kansas City startup scene, talk about the news and information that's going on in the local scene. And so that's what I've got going on for that podcast. And that's a fun one. It gets me out and talking to the different local Kansas City podcasters, or I didn't say podcasters, but local Kansas City startups.
Okay.
And I like that one. I try to do that one all from an iPhone.
Yeah.
So that one's kind of fun from the perspective that I'm showing people, here's how you can actually do it all from your iPhone. And that one I've gone where I've had a few episodes where I haven't done any editing, but it takes a lot of prep work and discipline to do a podcast where there's no editing. And those podcasts are short, for 20 minutes. So there's a big difference there.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of them that were released with no editing that there's no way normally I would ever release those episodes without editing out some of the stuff. So I think almost every one of those episodes, if I had created them on GarageBand and had the ability to edit this stuff, that would have come out.
Why? Because you're using what, Boss Jock for that?
I was using Boss Jock, but the whole goal of that podcast was to see if I could actually record on an iPhone without editing and do it in a formatted podcast with intro music, background music, the interview, outro, with news and information and outro music, and to have a really true produced, polished podcast that you do 100% from an iPhone. And I wanted to see what it took to do that, because I want to. One of the iBooks that I'm doing on how to podcast, I'm going to talk about how to podcast 100% from an iPhone. And I needed to really get that experience to learn what I didn't know. And
for me, automatically, I assume the GarageBand would be the best bet.
Well, yeah, because some people don't have a computer. Some people, their only computer these days.
I mean, on the iPhone.
Oh, no. GarageBand's crap on the iPhone compared to Boss Jock. But the problem with GarageBand, you really can't export as an MP3 file, and you want to be able to export as an MP3 file, and you want to be able to easily add music and start music in the background. It'd be a lot different setup and use case if you use GarageBand versus Boss Jock.
Really? Okay, so Boss Jock will enable you to add music, intros, outros, bumpers, all that stuff.
Yeah, you actually have it play live. You have them as carts, and you play live.
Okay.
And then I found there's an app called Twisted Wave where I really do need to edit if I ever dropped an F-bomb in an episode, which I definitely wouldn't release in that case.
Yeah.
Then I've got an app called Twisted Wave, and I can take it into Twisted Wave and edit it and then bring it back to Boss Jock and then export as MP3 and get it live.
Yeah.
So actually, I really need to get that show back up and running again and start with my next season of that show. So I did it one season of it, and I took off for the summer, and I've just been delinquent in relaunching that. I've got an interview with Tim Ferriss in the can that I'm going to put up to start the new season. And then I've got a couple other interviews I've already pre-recorded that I'm going to release when I need to fill in for weeks where I can't get out because I try to do it live. So the weeks where I can't go out and record live, I'll have those ready.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. It's interesting how you're doing it all just from the iPhone, and just you use a microphone, of course, along with it.
I use the IK Multimedia. They have a microphone called the iRig Mic HD.
iRig
Mic HD, and that comes with a USB micro to Lightning cord, and you plug the mic right into the iPhone, and you record right from that mic, and it does a good job. And again, people can hear the audio quality by just going to kcstartup411.com.
Who was your earliest influence, I guess, to start podcasting? Was it just the idea of podcasting?
No, I mean, Adam Curry.
Adam Curry, okay.
I mean, that was someone who I was listening to very early on, and paying attention to. Michael Gohagan, Doug Kay.
Wow.
Those were three people that in the early days that I learned from technically. Paul Vigiani. There was a few others that I was looking to for advice and help. Paul K. He never likes his last name, didn't happen. A gentleman by the name of Paul, who had a podcast called the PK&J Show, and he was an audio engineer at Ohio State University, and he taught me quite a bit on the audio side of stuff and advice. So there were different people who I would talk with, and the podcasters I was interviewing, I was not just interviewing them, I was picking their brains in the interview to figure out how they were doing it, what they were using for hosting, and how they edited their episodes, and what software they use, and what hardware they use. So that podcast for all along, especially in the very early days, was as much to teach me about podcasting than anything else.
Well, it's kind of what I'm doing now. How do you bring attention to your podcast when you're just getting started?
That's tough. That's one of the $1 million questions, is how do you actually jumpstart it? And part of that is making sure your title is named right, so if people are searching, they come across your show correctly and that it's relevant to them. Making sure you get your content out everywhere. Get it into iTunes, get it into Stitcher, into TuneIn, Spotify. To get it into all the different places, all the different podcast directories that are out there. Getting a smartphone app for your show so that people can discover it via the app stores. Those are keys. And then, per jump-starting the initial conversation, you need to go into the subject matter where whatever it is that you're covering. If it's, again, cigars or whatever it is, find the forum boards, find the bloggers that cover that subject matter, and engage in that community. Get into the community that your podcast is covering, and then let that community know about your show subtly, not spamish. Getting into a community does not mean showing up one day and putting a post up every hour you have a new episode. Yeah. That's not getting into the community. That's pissing the community off.
Yeah, for sure.
And getting into the community is getting involved in conversations and contributing to that community. And maybe in the signature, check out my podcast.
Yeah.
Subtly, not overtly. And people will. They'll start to check your podcast out, and they'll start to get involved in it, and they'll start to mention it, and interview the people that run the forums, or interview the key bloggers. And you will find that you and your podcast start to get a reputation and a following in those communities. And by the way, forum board communities nowadays really mean Google Plus communities or Facebook communities. So I use forum board communities as one, to show my age, and two, as more of a generic term, being, again, it could be a Snapchat community, it can be a Google Plus community, it can be a Facebook community,
any social media
something
tool
out there, right?
Yeah. If there's anything else that you want to put out there,
I would just say this: if anyone needs more information about podcasting, or questions about Libsyn specifically, they can email me, Rob, R-O-B, at Libsyn, Libsyn.com. So rob@libsyn.com, and I can help answer any questions you have with regards to podcasting. And again, I've got a free iBook out there. Just search for Podcast 101. It'll teach you everything you need to know to get started in podcasting.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much, Rob. I really appreciate you taking time to do this.
Jeff, thanks for having me on the show, and I look forward to hearing some of your new episodes once you start this show out in earnest.
All right. Well, that was easy for you guys anyways. Make sure to join us next time when our guest will be back of the Feedback Podcast, and that's a podcast centered around the Austin City nightlife. I've got one more thing before I leave y'all. Special thanks to Ruler Y, who made all the beats that you hear in the background of this podcast. And this here is one of his artists, Blazy. That's Blazy, straight out of San Antonio, Texas. And this is his track, The Blessing. And that's off of the Solar Rays album, available on iTunes. Show your love, people.
Yo, inside the next chamber, another notch in the belt. Victory gets mine, this time money dropped in the felt. Studied by courts, right, it's like knowledge of self. Come along, there's nothing wrong with some profit and wealth. A better future, rehearses I was cursed as a child. Grew up trash, fuck that, it even hurt me to smile. Try to set trends like X-Men and turn up the dial. They don't feel the so real, you haven't heard it in a while. Coast to coast, overdose, the mission the same. For people like me, precisely, we live with the stains. The bloodlust untouched, just let it fill up your veins. Come to a boil with spoil, spit artillery slain. Never jeopardize to set the five move as a unit. Every component is focused, your language is fluent. Take notes and make jokes like a typical student. Understand the lesson we're stressing, this is mental improvement. I'm slightly disturbed, every word they're meant for the weak. It's reckless, down to Texas, yo, we play with the heat. Suffer fast and discover that you trapped in the beat. Open your mind and find the Willie Roberts probably unique.
Some say it's a blessing, blessing, blessing.
You know the motto, desperado walk in the wasteland. Never rest, forever blessed, ready to make plans. The only reason these demons will shake hands. The root of evil is feeble, somebody please take a stand. Advance my stance and rise from the depths. At full speed, proceed to slide right up the steps. Leave them off from the start until the time of my death. Flatline, attack minds, in fact we try to impress. Another witness, it's vicious, can't avoid the collision. Like a car crash, my boss slaps adapt to the rhythm. Every rap edit, subtract, plus I'm back with the vision. Destroy and rebuild, still then react with conviction. Dragged out at the Mad Hatter, revising the route. Only the truth is living proof, now that the side of your mouth. Set it straight, that elevate, debate, silence and style. Go out with the bang, get same place, he dropping it foul. I'm slightly disturbed, every word they're meant for the weak. It's reckless, down to Texas, yo, we play with the heat. Suffer fast and discover that you trapped in the beat. Open your mind and find the Willie Roberts rather unique.
Some say it's a blessing,